Welcome to episode 17 of The Chess Angle. We are the podcast of the Long Island Chess Club in New York. And I'd like to start out with some introductory remarks and some housekeeping about the podcast. First of all, Happy New Year. I'm recording this in early January of 2022. So I kind of wanted to share where my head is at creatively for the podcast and what I'd like to do. These are just some ideas. When you're doing something creative, I believe you don't want to get into absolutes. This has happened very organically. It's been growing very organically, and I kind of want to keep it that way. I think if you give yourself strict deadlines, like by this date, I want to add this, or by this date, I want to do this, it sometimes becomes forced or contrived. But at any rate, I'm looking at doing 20 episode seasons and then taking a short break, maybe 3 weeks or a month, and then starting the next season. So after this episode, we have 3 more. And then after episode 20, we'll call that season 1. I'll take a short break and then we'll come back with season 2. And as I said, I'm thinking about 20 episodes per season. I think it's a good idea. Allows me to take a break and think about content rather than forcing myself or getting in a situation where I feel like I might be forcing myself to come up with content just to drop an episode. And that hasn't happened so far, and I don't want that to happen. So I think pacing it out that way is a good idea. We'll see how it goes. This might change, but I just kind of wanted to share what I'm kicking around inside of my head right now. So a few other things. As you know, if you've been listening to previous episodes, I don't really talk a lot about social media and publicity for the podcast, maybe once in a while, but I very rarely say, please rate us or, join us on Twitter, all that stuff. Because I know for me, when I listen to a podcast or I watch a YouTube video and every other sentence is, yeah, please subscribe or, please check out my other videos, it gets a little intrusive and I like to focus on the content. But of course, once in a while, I do like to draw attention to these things, and this will be one of those cases. So for social media, we do have a Twitter account, and I do it through the club, the Long Island Chess Club. So our Twitter handle is at LI Chess Club, okay, at LI Chess Club. I had started a separate Twitter account for the podcast, but then it gets to be like too much because I had a Twitter account for the club and then I had one for the podcast. And then I was thinking about doing an Instagram, and then it gets to the point where you're spread so thin. So my thought process was, let me just have one Twitter account for the club and the podcast will be part of that. So we're on Twitter under the auspices of the Long Island Chess Club, so to speak. I think that's just better. All right. So it's at LI Chess Club. If you're a Twitter person, I usually put announcements when a new episode drops or anything else. I don't post too often, but there's some stuff there. And if you like Twitter, you can check that out. As far as Facebook, I'm kicking around the idea of having a separate page for the Chess Angle. And it's my understanding that Facebook now has a podcast integration feature where I could have a page just for the podcast and you can also post episodes. I think I'm still kind of just looking into this, but for now, the club does have a Facebook page. It's really a group. It's a private group. It's a Long Island Chess Club. You would have to click to join. It's more local stuff about the club itself, but if you're interested for now, you're more than welcome to join it. And as I said, I'm kicking around the idea of maybe a separate page just for the podcast. Okay. Instagram, I'm probably not going to touch. I think it gets to be too much. And then as far as YouTube, well, I'm just laughing because I have a channel. It's for the Long Island Chess Club, but there's only one video on it that's been on there for a while. It's an introductory video for the club. However, if you would like to subscribe to our YouTube channel, it is Long Island Chess Club. Just look for it. But I'm just letting you know up front, there's only one video there because that's just something that I don't have time for right now, just with everything going on. And I'm in graduate school. But the plan is at some point down the road, I do want to throw in some content there, like instructional videos. But when I do it, I want to do it right. I don't just want to post things for the sake of posting it. I want them to be in 4K with good audio, not too long. I want them to look professional. And video content creation, even if you have experience doing it, is very time consuming. If you want it to look good, even if you put out a 12-minute video, it does take time between the planning and the recording and the editing and then the uploading. And when I jump into that, I want to do it right, which I don't have time for right now. But that's coming up at some point. That's a goal. We're in January of a new year, so I'm kind of thinking long term. But anyway, if you want to subscribe to our YouTube channel for our one video and, you'll be ready for when there's more content, you can do so. If not, you might just want to wait, because once I start getting into that, which might not be for a while, I'll let you know anyway. But I just wanted to share my thoughts moving forward. Now, the other thing I will say about reviews, if you like the podcast, I would love for you to leave a positive 5-star review if you want to. If not, that's cool also. But we appreciate it. And I'm not saying this for my own ego or anything. It just helps promote the podcast, makes it kind of stand out, so to speak. So if you would, give us a great review, I'd be happy if you did that. And just so you know, Spotify, as of maybe 2 weeks ago, they now have a rating system. So if you see us on Spotify, you have to go to the main podcast description for the Chess Angle, not under an individual episode. And you'll see you can give it a 5-star rating. They just started that. So if you want to do that, that would be great. And again, if not, I understand. I think Apple already has reviews in place. So just some things I wanted to share. All right, so that was a little bit more on housekeeping than I wanted to spend. But as you know, that's only going to be an occasional thing. So let's move on to the main content of this episode, where we're going to talk about sneaky chess tricks and swindles and head games, which of course I am not advocating at all. Okay, this is strictly kind of a fun anecdotal episode. Think of this as coffee talk, right? It's like we're hanging out, drinking coffee at Starbucks and just kind of talking about interesting things we've experienced at tournaments. I think that was an old Saturday Night Live routine, right? Coffee talk, right? And they had like a Barbra Streisand and something like that. Maybe I'm wrong. I think it was Saturday Night Live. But anyway, let's move on. I'm going to talk about some interesting things that I've experienced personally, that I've either faced as a player or witnessed as a TD. And then I'll share some other things that I kind of heard of anecdotally. All right. So again, I'm not advocating any of this. These are just kind of funny, interesting stories or things that people have done. I mean, in some cases, it's more disturbing than funny, but I'm going to share these anyway. So one of the things that players do, and again, we're talking about sort of like sneaky, unethical things that players do to win a game, mostly in person we're going to be talking about. But one of the things we'll do, and I'm not giving these in any particular order here, is they'll do the old phantom check move. So what they'll do, they'll wait till their opponent is in time pressure, because that's when this is really effective. And they'll make a move that's not check, but they'll say check anyway. So they'll make a move and go check. And then the idea is that your opponent who's in time pressure now has to waste more time looking for this check that doesn't exist. So like, wait a minute, where's this check? Is it a discover check? And, and then if they say, oh, there's no check, you can just, oh, I thought there was, it's kind of, hard to prove if you act like it was an honest mistake. Of course, it's a little bit of a dirty trick, but this is something I've seen. Another thing is calling checkmate when there is no checkmate, so that your opponent kind of looks and wastes time on his clock. These are things I've seen. And then something else is the old slamming of the piece to make it seem like a strong move. So you have a worse position and then you make a move, usually your queen or a more valuable piece, and then you kind of slam the piece down as if to say, ha, gotcha. Even though you have no idea if it's a good move or not, it's to kind of get into your opponent's head. Not really allowed to do that, not supposed to do that. I've seen people slam the clock as well to try to rattle their opponent. Doesn't really work all the time, but this is what people have done. So moving on, this is kind of a longer story. I've definitely had some characters come to the club. All right. If you run a club long enough, you're going to see some interesting characters come in and out. So there was this one guy who, I don't know if he worked in a lab or something, but he would bring in this stool to sit in, like this really high stool, almost like a bar stool type thing. And it would place him like really high above the table. It looked ridiculous. It was really weird. And I guess it was a way to have him be higher than his opponent and kind of look down. I don't know if it was an intimidation thing. I mean, he was claiming that it just helped him, but it was very strange. And then he would open every game with H4 or H5 is black. So if he was white, he would open H4, right? If he had the black pieces, he would respond with H5, regardless of what the other person played. But the funny thing is, he actually did fairly well. He had like a high 1700, low 1800 rating. And it was very interesting. But the problem is, in addition to that, he would sometimes tell his opponent that he was a beginner, even if he wasn't, which of course is unethical. So he would sit down and say, "Hi, how you doing? I'm a beginner," which was crazy because on the pairing sheet, his rating was listed like it said like 17, whatever it was, let's say 1767. And yet he would still tell his opponent this, which is, like, don't you think they're going to look? Because chess players are known for checking their opponent's rating at some point, either before the game. So it was really strange. He's no longer with us, but it was something very odd. So I just thought I'd share that. Next thing is the crazy draw offers. All right. And again, draw offers, as I've mentioned previously, that's probably the most abused and sort of butchered rule among players, is that people don't offer a draw properly. But one of the things that I've seen, and I've faced this myself, that drives me crazy is the so-called hand hover draw offer. That's when you say to your opponent, "I offer a draw," and then you stick your hand like right in their face as if you're forcing them to shake it. Yeah, that drives me crazy. And I know a lot of people don't like that. You're really not supposed to do that. You're supposed to make your move, say, "I offer a draw," and then hit your clock and then wait quietly. Now, if your opponent says, "Yes, I agree to the draw," then you shake hands. But they'll stick their hand out, say, "I offer a draw," and they'll just leave it hanging there. So yeah, that's not good. But I've seen that quite a bit. So moving on. Another thing is when a player doesn't fully place a piece on a square, especially a pawn. So let's say let's say the E pawn's in the starting position and they want to go E4, move it 2 spaces. They'll sort of put it between E3 and E4. Like, you don't know which square it's on. And there's a couple of reasons they do that, presumably. Because again, we're talking about sort of sneaky, unethical things I've seen. It could be that they want to pretend later that it was on either square, depending on what helps them, or it could be just to annoy the opponent. But I've had players do this, especially younger ones, and it's really irritating, but they do it. And it's kind of like a sneaky thing. It's almost like a speed chess thing, like a street chess type of move, but I've seen it. Now, the big thing for this section involves cheating. Now, if you're interested in cheating specifically, I devoted a whole episode to that. Episode 2, one of the first episodes I did, is all about cheating. We actually had a cheater at the club. I won't get into the whole story now because that's what that episode deals with, but it was basically a very strong player who was sandbagging. For those of you who don't know what that is, that's basically when you deliberately throw games in order to lower your rating so that you can enter a major tournament and win money in a section with players much weaker than you are, right? So for example, let's say you're rated 2200 but you want to compete in the under 2000 section because the competition is going to be weaker than you and you have a chance of winning that section and winning money. So what you do is you deliberately play games at smaller clubs to lose points to shave your rating down so that you're eligible for that category, and then you would play in it. Of course, you can't do that. It's against the rules. It's illegal. It's unethical. And he attempted to do it at my club. You can check out episode 2. I explained everything there. But that was kind of disturbing. But one of the things that I notice, both as a player and TD, are the false claims of cheating. And the truth is, there's more false claims of cheating than actual cheating that takes place. So what happens is now is a player gets up from the table a lot, he must be cheating, or he checks his phone a lot, he must be cheating, or he's rated much lower than I am and he's playing well, he must be cheating. Most of the time it ends up being not true. But of course, as I mentioned before, there are situations where, yes, cheating does take place, and it's unfortunate. It's probably more prevalent online because you really can't tell what the person's doing behind a computer screen. But here are some other incidents regarding, cheating or just, kind of sketchiness. One, which I've mentioned before, I was playing in a major tournament up at Foxwoods, and my opponent, a young, maybe 10-year-old kid, he was checking his scorebook, flipping back to previous games during the opening phase of our game because he wanted to see what he should play, because I guess it was a book opening, which of course you can't do. And I ended up catching him, which, by the way, I questioned those scorebooks where you have previous games in them. As far as I'm concerned, they shouldn't be allowed. You should have a fresh score sheet. Okay. You shouldn't have a list of previous games that you can refer to. But that's just me. And I'll tell you the other thing, at the major events, especially a lot of the CCA events, the Continental Chess Association events, which is the group that hosts most of the big events that people play in, the Foxwoods Open and the National Open, all that stuff. One of the reasons I don't play there anymore, this is just me, is not only because I don't have time to devote an entire weekend to that and the concentration level that's needed for that. I mean, you really need to clear the decks of everything in your head to do that, which I can't do right now. I don't have time for that, nor do I want to. But one of the reasons I wouldn't go back, even if I did have time, is because there's a lot of sketchy players at those events, generally speaking. And I've seen some crazy things. I mean, there was one tournament. This was actually where I am on Long Island. This was a number of years ago, where the CCA actually had a major tournament at one of the hotels here. And it was an out-of-state player, which is a red flag right there, because for a more local tournament, usually someone's not going to come from out of state for that, even if it is a CCA event. Usually if you're coming from out of state, it would be for the World Open or the National Open, something like that. So this is a fairly localized tournament, and someone's coming from out of state, which was red flag number one. And then he had on this green jacket, and he kept looking inside the jacket. Now, this is coming from a friend of mine who was there. I was at the tournament, but I only saw this in bits and pieces because I was a little further away. I wasn't on a board right next to him, but he kept looking in his jacket, the inside of his jacket, and he kept looking away from the board quite a bit, but yet was playing inexplicably good moves. So it just, I don't know, it just seemed, but these types of stories and incidents, they happen all the time at these major events. So I don't know. And he was at the time, this was the under 1400 category as well, which was very strange. So now let's talk about other stories or incidents that I heard from other people. So this is really the apocryphal section of this whole thing. These are different things I've heard, so I can't verify how true they are, but I don't know. I mean, I read a study recently that 80% of office gossip is true. So, I'm thinking, that probably applies to this as well. So when you're at your office and you hear gossip, they've studied this. Apparently, there's a very good chance statistically that this gossip you're hearing is correct. So if we refer to that study, then everything I'm telling you now probably happened 80%, but we'll see. But anyway, here we go. So one of the things I've heard of is where you would actually set your opponent's clock slightly differently from yours, which is brazen. I mean, that's just crazy. I mean, if someone did that at my club, they would not be coming back. And I don't think it's something I would really ever see, but this is something I've heard about, and I don't really know how you could get away with that. I mean, for example, if you have a delay on your clock, but not your opponent's, I mean, sooner or later that's going to show up, but this is something I've heard. Another one is if your opponent is about to queen a pawn. All right. I mean, for those of you who are beginners out there, even, I'm sure that once your pawn reaches the 8th rank, you can make it a queen. I mean, technically you can also make it a knight, a bishop, or a rook. There are some situations where you may need to under promote, like to prevent stalemate, but 99.9% of the time, you're going to make it a queen when it reaches the end. Most of you know that. So what'll happen is your player is about to queen a pawn, and you'll grab, or players grab the queen and they hide it in their hand so that, the player advances the pawn and he's looking for the queen and he can't find it. And the idea is that he's now losing time on his clock. I don't know. These are things I've heard. Another one is where you deliberately write down a move you're not going to play. So in live tournaments, as many of you know, you have to keep score. If you're playing in a US chess rated event, you have to keep score for a number of reasons. Now, in many cases, you're allowed to write the move first before making it, if the tournament allows it, which we do. So what some players do is they'll do just that. They'll write the move down first before they play it for a number of reasons. It's a blunder check for some people. It's not too effective for me, but some people do that. There's something about writing it down and the physical process of doing it that forces you to really rethink the move and make sure you're not making a mistake. Or they'll write it down just because that's how they keep score. They'd rather do it before they move or after. But what some people will do is they'll write a move that they don't intend to play, and they'll make sure their score sheet is visible to the opponent. So the idea is to kind of get your opponent to start analyzing with the wrong move, and then all of a sudden you play a different move. I guess it's kind of a silly head game. Doesn't make sense to me, but this is something people have done. The other thing I've heard of is where you kind of move two pieces at once. So in other words, let's say you want to move your knight. You'll grab your knight, but then you'll kind of push a pawn in front of it as well, so that you're kind of moving two pieces at once. I've never seen anything close to that, but someone mentioned that to me once. And the other thing is, if you have a bishop move or a queen move, like on a diagonal, you'll move it to a different colored diagonal that it couldn't possibly be on. So for example, let's say you have a light squared bishop and you're moving it across the board. You'll make like this long move, but it'll end up on a dark square. And sometimes your opponent might not catch it. Now, obviously, if the other bishop's on the board, that's going to be a problem. But who knows? These are all crazy things that I've heard. But that being said, obviously, I don't advocate any of this. This is just more of an entertainment type episode, even though these things actually happened. And like I said in the beginning, this is kind of just a coffee talk episode about some crazy things that I've seen. I've been very fortunate at the club that incidents like that have been very minor to non-existent. And the truth is, the overwhelming majority of chess players, even very competitive ones, they follow the rules. They're there to have a good time and to play and to get better. And unfortunately, it's worse online, because behind a computer screen, as I said before, you really can't police what the person is doing. It's much more difficult. I know for me, when I play online on chess.com, what I do, there's a privacy feature where you can have the chat and messaging turned off, and it's so much better. So when I play online, nobody can message me while I play, and I don't message them. It's just better that way. It's much more enjoyable experience. nice and clean, no worries. Because if you allow the chat during the game, that's when people get annoying. So, there's some things you can do, at least online, to make it a more pleasant experience. All right. But at any rate, I appreciate you listening. So we have 3 more episodes for this season. That's the plan right now. Anyway, who knows what'll happen. And then we'll go from there. So as always, I hope you win your next game. Have a great day.